Today on Locked On Phoenix Suns, last week, the Suns made a big move to create a roster spot. This week, one of their potential big targets, Lonnie Walker, headed to Boston on a training camp deal. Did the Suns miss out, or did they not even want Lonnie in the first place? We'll break it down next.
You are Locked On Suns, your daily Phoenix Suns podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And we're back. This is Locked On Phoenix Suns, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm Brendon Kleen, your host and a credentialed media member covering the Suns for the past 7 seasons. Welcome in. Thank you for making Locked On Suns your first listen here on this Friday, closing out the week, closing out the month. Appreciate you being here. Hit follow or subscribe if you haven't already. We're here for you every single day on every platform, including YouTube. So just hit that button. You'll get a new episode in your feed Monday, Wednesday, and Friday for the next couple of weeks. Daily as the season comes around. Get locked onto the Phoenix Suns right here. Start your day off with us every day. Become an everydayer, part of the thousands of people who are doing exactly that with this show. Joining us as he does every week, for the last time though, Stephen, which is crazy, it is Stephen Perjone-Garner, a writer at Bright Side of the Sun and a contributor to the All City Network. We're going to talk about a player who is not a Phoenix Sun and probably was never going to be a Phoenix Sun today, which means that it's August, Stephen. I think that is just a sign of where we are in the calendar, but it's an interesting conversation, I think, of why that wasn't a target for Phoenix and kind of where they might go now that the waiving of both EJ Liddell and Nasir Little is final. Today's episode, guys, brought to you by FanDuel. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. All you got to do is visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. All right. So, as I mentioned there, Stephen, Lonnie Walker, he's on the Boston Celtics on a training camp deal. Couldn't even get, or maybe chose not to get, a full minimum deal even. So he will go to Boston and try to make that team and convince them he's worth that roster spot and that guaranteed money. Meanwhile, the Suns still do have an open roster spot from waiving and stretching Nasir Little and cutting EJ Liddell, who was never really here. Did you feel, you mentioned Robert Covington when we first talked about this move. Did you think of Lonnie as a real target for this team, or have you always been thinking more of that wing forward mold? Where did you come down when you saw this news come through?
I was thinking more the Robert Covington types, because those players know how to play to a specific role and doing things on the margins that I think this Phoenix Suns team is going to need, especially around the context and construct with the big three. You need to be able to knock down, catch and shoot threes. You need to be able to set good screens, obviously chip in on the glass and play solid to above average defense on the ball and off it and provide size. Lonnie Walker is he's a wing for sure. He's a smaller wing though. And the most value he's ever going to bring to a team is his scoring. And that's just not something that the Suns need. If you're speaking excluding the big three, you have a player like Grayson Allen. You have a player like Bol that you might bring into the rotation at times, depending on matchups. Like, there are just so many different areas and ways for this team to look for and find scoring in layers throughout the roster. It never crossed my mind for Lonnie Walker to be a part of this Phoenix Suns franchise. This go around, after trades happen, things like that, who knows? Maybe they could visit this conversation going forward if he doesn't make the Celtics roster for whatever reason. But no, I was thinking more so Robert Covington than the Lonnie Walker type.
Yeah, here's how I've been thinking about it. If the Suns' plan had played out this summer where they didn't get Monte Morris and they just got Tyus Jones, maybe there would have been some space for a player like Lonnie Walker. But obviously that's all revisionist history. That's not what it looked like. Even by the time they cut Nasir Little, I think it was pretty clear that, a guard was not, they already did that. They already cut a guy and got a guard one time this summer. It didn't make sense that they would need to explore that again. So yeah, with Lonnie, I think I could have been convinced of it from a talent standpoint. Obviously Boston doesn't exactly have a spot in their rotation for this guy. So it's a little bit of an upside play for them as well. But You're talking about a 6'4" creator who's only 25. And for whatever reason, I'm not fully sure why he even lasted this long personally. Like, he is, 58 games last year. He did struggle with injuries, but he's been a at least league average shooter the past couple seasons. He can get his own bucket. I'm not saying he's a stopper, but it feels like he can be, a pretty good defender. Maybe the only knock you would say is that he kind of looks for his shot a little more than a player of his caliber should, and kind of can take the offense out of rhythm. But, for Boston, if he hits and can settle in, it makes a lot of sense. It could have been similar with the Suns, but he wants an opportunity, I'm sure. And so it probably just never made a lot of sense. That said, I think it just does beg the question of kind of where the Suns are going with this roster spot, right? I mean, I think that they clearly have some kind of plan, and I think that's why it got Suns fans' attention, is because Lonnie was the biggest name left on the board. He was like the most, like, that's a player I know, right? Like, and so for him to go to another team, I think just confused people. I mean, you're looking at the rest of this. It's Covington. Gordon Hayward's still on this list, but we know he retired. It's Markelle Fultz, who's still a free agent, but plays the same exact position as the other two guys that I just mentioned that the Suns have already gotten this summer. So let's just jump off this. I think we agree Lonnie didn't make a lot of sense, but let's open this conversation up to, where do we now, a week out and having another free agent off the board, what do we think the Suns' plans might be for that roster spot, and what are their needs? I think those might be the same answer, but they might be a little bit different. So we'll get into all of that coming up next. First, today's show brought to you by the FanDuel Sportsbook, the official sportsbook of the Locked On Podcast Network. You've heard us talk a lot about FanDuel. Well, we have something a little different for you right now. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5. You get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Then with the YouTube TV base plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out-of-market game. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment, and you can cancel any time. Again, all you got to do is go into FanDuel, bet $5 on anything, and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. I'm looking at, let's see here. Do we have D-backs Dodgers odds yet? Probably not. They're currently playing against the Mets as we're recording this. I've told you before, Cardinals, I'm not a huge fan, but somehow there's action on the Cardinals side of this. It used to be 6.5. It's moved all the way to 5.5. They're still underdogs, but I don't know. Maybe you go with the crowd and you feel a little better about that early morning, week 1, Cardinals, Bills game. Either way, you get 3 weeks of FanDuel of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV from FanDuel with that bet. So just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started and download America's number one sportsbook. All right, Steven, let's keep it rolling here. So talked a little bit about that forward spot. I would agree with you. I have one question, though, before we go further, which is, there was some noise around the time that they made this little move, and obviously not keeping EJ Liddell, which theoretically they could have done, I guess, that a lot of this is coming up from how much the Suns like Ryan Dunn. And Kellen Olson, I think on his podcast, or maybe in written form, made the prediction that Dunn will be a starter by the end of the season. We've talked a lot about him, but I don't know. There's a way you could look at this, and it's almost less of a need or a plan. And really, all signs might just point back to, hey, they really like this rookie. Even that video they put out this week of the behind the scenes of the draft, they weren't talking out of their you-know-what there. They even on draft night were saying, let's go get Dunn, no matter what the trade was going to be. So I don't know. I'm not fully convinced on my own love of Dunn's readiness to contribute myself, but I am kind of feeling more and more like they might just really actually like him that much. And a lot of these moves might just be geared toward, let's give that dude an opportunity and a place to succeed.
Yeah, I think I'm glad you brought up the War Room video from draft night, both days actually. It was very clear that not just Josh Bartlestein, not just James Jones, not just Matt Ishbia, but especially Mike Budenholzer, the person that's going to be coaching this particular player, putting them in roles and things like that, was very confident in Ryan Dunn. I believe it was Mike that told Matt, I want Dunn, and it was said with a certain level of urgency, like, let's make this happen. If a head coach is bought into a player that's going to be a prospect initially, that much, you got to go with it for one. And it does very much seem like everybody is confident in the player that he could potentially be, even by the start of the regular season, yet alone by the time 82 games have gone by. I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility that, as you said with Kellen Olsen, Ryan Dunn potentially starts by the end of the season. I'm just curious how, like we've talked about before, his dynamics over a game integrate to the NBA level, and how quickly does his skill development ascend to where it needs to be for him to be effective to play the way that he desires. Those are the things I'm really most curious about. But I would say, to answer your question directly or to answer your statement, it does seem like the fact that they haven't had a sense of urgency to go get any one of the names that I've had in mind for the roster at this kind of dead space, even with the additional roster spot they've opened up. The fact that there's been no urgency there, at least in these first 2 weeks now, really speaks to the confidence that they do have in what he ultimately will be this season.
Okay, so of the players still available, I will basically filter out a few here. So Isaac Okoro, probably the best player that's still a free agent.
For sure.
Not going anywhere, at least not going to the Suns, I should say, right? He is, exactly. Even if he takes his qualifying offer, which is kind of would be a bad, not the best outcome for him, that's still like $8-9 million. It's more than, of course, anywhere near what the Suns could offer him. So that's a no. I tend to think that Cedi Osman is another name out there. I tend to think that he will just end up back with the Spurs if there's not something out there for him. I don't know their roster spot situation, but he kind of was like a point guard for them at times, and really was like a steadying presence for that younger group, and obviously can shoot it. We know they like Euro players over there and everything else. So I think he's going to stay. That's my take. All right.
That is hilarious context for Cedi, and makes the absolute most sense too.
Yeah. So there you go. Gordon Hayward retired. Evan Fournier, kind of a similar thing to what we just said with Lonnie, like just not really what the Suns need. I'm not sure what he really has left in the tank at the NBA level. So let's just go through some of these other names then, and you tell me if you think there's any chance that they are the thing we're looking for here as we try to answer what the Suns might be thinking with this roster spot. Because again, it doesn't even have to be a full deal. They could do something like what Boston just did with Lonnie Walker and give somebody a training camp deal and say, hey, earn that roster spot, right? So let's go through some of these players. All right. I kind of threw Markelle Fultz out. What do you think?
No, I don't think Markelle Fultz, they don't need another scoring guard or really a player with that particular mindset to the extent that Markelle Fultz would have. They also don't need a point guard now, which has been a big topic of conversation the last couple of seasons too. So yeah, I'm saying no for Markelle Fultz.
All right, Doug McDermott, what do you think?
Dougie McBuckets is a very interesting fit. The movement shooting, size within that movement shooting. I don't think they need another player that they have to worry about defensively to the extent that you would in insulating him to get the value that he brings in shooting. So I would say no to Doug McDermott at this moment in time.
Okay, here's a player who I feel like never really catches on, but I'm never really sure why he can't, which is Justin Holiday.
Justin is a very interesting name. I was all in on him being with the Denver Nuggets last season. He's definitely been a journeyman, but he's always brought value everywhere he's went. I just don't think he has the requisite size that the Suns would be looking for in a forward going forward, because of the volume of guards that they have and smaller size players that they'll be having in their main rotation. So at this moment in time, I would say no to Justin as well.
Yeah, I think that's probably the answer to my own question, right? I think like he's kind of a 4
Yeah,
defensively, especially at his age, but he's not
yeah.
big or athletic enough to really do that anymore.
Mm.
Jay Crowder.
Now we get into the names that I did have on my list, and for
Hmm.
just for recounting purposes, I did have 4 names that are free agents on the wing that stood out to me. One we already spoke on, in Cedi Osman. He brought the Suns context, which I think is very relevant. If there was any player, I would certainly love to see Cedi in the Suns context, but Jay Crowder is very much on that list of names that I'm speaking to. For obvious reasons, you don't have to dive too far into things with Jay. He's been here before. He's won here before with the Suns. I don't think he spent time with Mike Budenholzer in particular. Correct me if I'm wrong on that. Did he spend
He
time while
did. He
Mike was
did.
there? Did he?
Yeah,
Okay, okay.
that he did, and I that's been part of the reason that I've been skeptical of it, because when he got there after the deadline where KD came here,
Yes, 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 yes,
um,
yes. Mm-hmm.
Budenholzer didn't really seem to want to play him despite
Yeah,
the kind of need there. So I don't know what happened, but that
yeah.
that that would worry me.
Yes, that context definitely matters. And I'm glad you brought that for us because I got a little cloudy there for a second. I do like Jay Crowder with this team, just for the physicality part, where if he comes into the game, he's going to be able to do the little things you need from the wings. The screening, like I talked about, knocking down corner 3-pointers, quick touch decisions when the ball's moving in rotation, cutting, and then bringing a requisite level of defense. Those are things that Jay would bring. I don't know how his obvious role wouldn't be what it was when he was with the Suns 2 seasons ago. That goes without saying. But I do think that he can still provide some veteran value on the margins in like a 10th man type of role.
Who were the other 2 on your list? Or one? One more?
Two.
Two
I
more.
had 2 more. It
Okay.
was obviously Robert Covington. That was one of the last 2 names we haven't spoken to yet. And then the other big one for me was O'Shea Brissett. O'Shea
Yeah, that's where
Brissett
I was
is a
going to go
wing.
next. Yeah.
Yeah, he's a wing prospect for me that I was hoping the Suns could get their hands on if Indiana ever decided to trade for him or to trade him last season. And of course, the Celtics just come swooping in and, they make these little moves on the margins that make all the sense in the world. Now, naturally, he didn't play the biggest role for that team, but he certainly fits the mold of type of players that they like to buy into in terms of skill development. Obviously, a long-term play. And I think he had some good moments with them last season, especially given the role that he was going to be playing behind JB, JT, and Derek White. So there's a lot of depth on the wing position with the Boston Celtics. With the Suns, I would love to see him in their context, for one, because of the spacing, the shooting, the scoring, so that he would be insulated to do a lot of the little things on offense that make him a good player, and also allow for him to shine through with his abilities and even tap even more into his potential on the defensive side of things. I think investing in not just Ryan Dunn defensively long term, but finding somebody else that can kind of guard down a little bit, but also can be impactful in a switching scheme like O'Shea Brissett can. I think there's a lot of value in having that player be maybe the quote unquote last addition to your roster, and allowing for him to kind of work through and figure out what role he can play with this franchise. That would be a home run type of move in terms of the players that are actually available and attainable for the Suns.
Yeah, he's the one player Boston didn't bring back, and it felt like it was his choice. Like, he put out a video that was explaining it basically, and it sounded like he could have if he wanted to. They brought back like Namias Kita and guys people don't even necessarily know the name of. So obviously you would think they would have wanted him. And so it's odd that he would still be available given all of that he chose to leave. But yeah, I think he makes sense. I think the lineup versatility and kind of optionality aspect of it makes it the right type of piece to bring in, just because he's not so limited in his role, and he could end up being somebody where if you have an injury or a down season here or there, he could be a part of how you solve for that across the board, rather than just being, he's just Grayson Allen's backup or whatever it might be. So I like it, but it's almost, to me, it's none of these guys are better at what the Suns need than what they already have at the end of the day, right? And that's kind of why I started with Ryan Dunn, where between him and Okogie, like, you could convince me Brissett has a better season than them and kind of finally breaks out. but I could also see one or both of Dunn or Okogie just ending up ahead of him anyway. And then it's kind of like, why not? So that brings me to what I think we're headed toward, which is that they go into the season with this roster spot open. And what that would mean is, or they at least go into camp, let's say. That means either a trade or a buyout player becomes available to them as the season goes on. So let's look a little bit ahead to some of those possibilities coming up next. All right, closing out the show. So we kind of talked about the fact that Dunn could just be the answer here, Steven. We talked about the free agents on the market. There's also obviously the possibility of using that roster spot to bring back multiple players in a trade, which the Suns are allowed to do. They're not allowed to combine their own players, but they can get 2 for 1 if they find a deal that allows them to do that, which, easier said than done.
Yeah.
And they obviously can just keep it open even later and get a buyout player. So we'll get to the buyouts next, but just to reopen the question, because it's always worth asking, something that, goes under the radar a little bit when we're talking about this. Where are you with the possibility of Grayson Allen being traded when he becomes eligible to be traded? Is that a firm no for you, or is that a let's maybe quietly have some phone calls and see what happens?
Well, for full transparency, I'll know for the record, I was very much on the side of trading Grayson Allen last season. I obviously acknowledged and highlighted and dove into the film and numbers multiple times on the values that he brought to the Suns and how he really helped to bridge the gap between the starting realm of players, particularly the big three, and then that next layer after the 4 and 5 level of players. I think that Grayson Allen, if he was traded last season, I think that would have been getting more value in return than you possibly could, just because, for one, he wasn't expiring. And he was making a requisite amount of money for a team that didn't have many other avenues to make a move. And then also the fact that on that expiring deal, he was the best shooter in all of basketball. And you had a clear need for defense and size on the wing. There was no better avenue for them to upgrade at the wing position and maybe even potentially make their roster make more sense. Instead of starting 3 guards, be able to start 2 guards. Obviously, Devin Booker and Bradley Beal have, let's just say, somebody like the guy from Orlando, Jonathan Isaac. Yeah. Just as a template and example. I'm not saying that Orlando would have accepted it, but that's the type of situation where you guys have something in depth that we desire, and we have something that you hardly have at all on your roster. Let's see if there's something there. That's the type of deal that I would have in mind in terms of what I was thinking with Grayson Allen being traded. Full transparency brought to the context. Now I'm going to speak to the moment. I do still feel like Grayson Allen should be traded, but I think this season with the roster that they have, the caveat where last season I felt like it should have only been Grayson, I feel like now they have some optionality with the rosters, with the roster moves they made and the transactions that they put forth to bring players back. Particularly, obviously, Grayson at the top of that, Royce O'Neal and Josh Okogie. I feel like 1, if not 2 of those 3 players will be traded. They'll upgrade the roster, most likely at the center position and then the wing, or some type of succession between those 2. But I do think that 2 of those 3 players will be moved before this deadline this season. How about you? What you thinking about from that realm of players, or if you have somebody else in mind?
Yeah, I think I'm not moving off the idea that this roster is not complete. Their big move is still yet to be made, and I think they have to make it in order to get closer to the level of talent and fit and everything that the best teams in the West have. And that's why even though I understand why Grayson is so valuable here, and
yes,
he's been an amazing addition and best year of his career, made himself a lot of money. Like, you can't knock anything Grayson Allen as an individual player has done here. You just still have to keep the possibility open that in order to become the best version of what the Suns need to become, he might have to be a casualty of that. And honestly, I think the other part of all of this is, it was never a perfect fit. Remember, they didn't know they were getting Grayson Allen necessarily. They thought
Mm-hmm.
it might be Victor Oladipo once upon a time. And so
Mm-hmm.
we can't kind of overlook that. He plays the same position as two of the best three players on the team and does a lot of the same things as those players. So the part of it that becomes hard for me, though, is that it's a lot of these types of trades that have been very tricky to make in the modern kind of new CBA environment, where you're talking about good teams trading good players for each other. That's a tough, because Grayson Allen is only really valuable now that he's making a lot of money on a long-term contract, and there's not a lot of upside necessarily left for him. He's kind of in his prime. That's the type of player that is most valuable to a good team. So what good team is going to basically kind of do the Suns a favor at the end of the day and say, yeah, maybe Grayson fits here, but we're going to take a player that you want to get rid of and give you a better fit so you can come beat us in the playoffs or something. You know what I mean? Like that's tricky. So like, I think Memphis makes a lot of sense. A reunion there. I think that, there's a lot of teams where I could see him fitting in, but it's just a matter of what's that really going to look like. So yeah, I think whether it's Grayson, Royce, Okogie, or even a Nurkic trade, if they find the perfect one, those four guys we're going to be talking about all season in this type of context. The thing about Grayson is they haven't been able to talk about trades with him all summer, but there is still this chance that if they've had something in their back pocket, maybe it could happen before the season. I'm at like 5% on that. I really don't see it to disrupt so much again right before camp, the same way they did when they brought him in, but we'll see. All right. The other thing I wanted to hit really quick though is buyout players. Just look ahead. Just start to get this is so far ahead of ourselves here, but it's probably a similar type of exercise to what the Suns are doing. I have three names, Steven, that I think I could see getting bought out, and I have two that are a little less likely but could be on the radar. And I'm going to tell you right now, I'm not really excited about any of them, but I'll tell you what they are anyway. All right, so PJ Tucker, Kevon Looney, and the last one, maybe the most intriguing, depending on how his recovery goes, Steven Adams. What do you think?
Steve-O has always been fun. His impact was very loud with Memphis when he was healthy. I'm siding of those three names. I'm siding more with Kevon Looney, just because health-wise he's typically available. He's proven to be able to do the things that the Suns are going to need for a center to do directly with their context, while also being, I mean, this is up to opinion, but I think everybody would agree he's at least a little bit better than every one of the Suns' present centers on the roster at this moment in time. And I think there's a lot of value that comes with that. Now, obviously, you have to also remember he's a buyout candidate for a reason. So you don't want to put too much stock in it. But I do think that Kevon Looney is a player that could come in and add value and have impact for the Suns. And I think just generally speaking, if you're a front court player that's existed with the Golden State Warriors to the extent that he has, you're going to be able to play a certain level or a certain type of basketball to help bridge the gap and keep things afloat.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. I'm not positive he would be available, but he was potentially going to be a casualty of their cap situation if they weren't able to make some other things happen. And they brought him back anyway because they, lost Clay and everything, left Chris Paul behind and everything else. So he could be available, but like you said, it's probably because they went through another season where he wasn't quite as impactful as maybe they would like him to be. And then what are you really getting? Probably not any sort of starter or anything like that. It's just another backup. Is he better than Mason Plumlee? All these questions start to come up. The other two names that I had as a little bit less likely, and this is all just obviously guessing and speculating, but Gary Payton, also from the Warriors, and Trey Lyles from the Kings.
Trey Lyles, the name seems like it's always been involved in switching teams in some capacity.
Monty Williams would be pulling his hair out. Well, he doesn't have any. That's rude of me. He'd be scratching his eyes out if Trey Lyles got here. the most Monty Williams type player ever. And it would have been like
Yes.
2 years too late for being a Sun. Yeah, I don't really love either of those names, to be honest with you. I think Gary Payton's kind of
Nah.
in the Kogi camp, and he has his own health issues, and Lyles like doesn't really fit on this team, in my opinion.
Yes. Gary Payton II will be playing the 5 or the 4 on offense more often than not, which is tough to build around, even with the spacing and versatility the Suns have on roster. And Trey Lyles is just it's the consistency part. He had flashes with the Kings last season that were really loud, but at the same time, he just wasn't the type of player that they needed for him to be, when they needed it most. And it was part of the inconsistencies they saw as a team last season in their front court. So nah, I would pass on those two at this moment in time. Now we revisit this conversation in 2.5, 3, 4 months. Maybe that might change a little bit, but as of now, nah.
The only other one, and again, I don't think this is really doesn't make sense for reasons we've said multiple times on this show already, but I know Suns fans have been keeping an eye on Dennis Schroder. I don't think that you need to bring a third small point guard in here, but if maybe, Monte Morris goes somewhere else, or they do move some of these guards in some way, shape, or form, he's a good player. I just don't. It might just be a bad luck type of thing for the Suns that he becomes available right after they finally kind of address that need. We'll see. But the point here, as it always is with this kind of conversation about buyout players, is they're not something you can count on to save your team, And so that's why I just come back to trades. And it sounds like you and I are on the same kind of wavelength there, where whether it's a 2-for-1 or they just kind of like the flexibility from a financial standpoint of not having an extra roster spot they have to be paying. And maybe somebody comes along, maybe somebody doesn't. Maybe they go into the playoffs with 14 guys anyway, and it's more of a 1-for-1 trade, and that roster spot doesn't factor in at all. I think the way that they're going to address whatever needs they think they have by, December, January, February, it's all going to be with that trade. It's still just kind of we're waiting for that last shoe to drop.
Yeah, that's definitely what it seems like to me. I think they're playing the patience card, and I don't think that's something that can work against them in any capacity, especially allowing for the dust to settle on people's rosters. See who potentially might just be cut for whatever reason, and if whatever cut players might fit their context better than the Rolodex of players available at this moment in time. So I do think they're playing the patient card is correct in this moment, and I'm very curious to see what the buyout market looks like, in addition to players that might come available for trade that the Suns could actually afford as well.
All right. That'll wrap us up. A big shout out to Steven for his 4 months, 5 months here, whatever it was, where the Suns played a grand total of 4 basketball games, which was really bad timing on my part. But however, life goes on. The summer goes on. We're not back to daily next week like I thought we were. That will be September 16th, but we do have a big announcement coming Monday regardless. You'll just have to wait for the extra dosage of this podcast in your ears a little longer as we get closer to training camp. Go check out Steven's work. His Twitter's on the screen here if you're on YouTube. Lots to come as the season moves closer for everybody in the Suns media community, and it should be a fun season. So thank you, Steven. Any final words for the people?
No, I appreciate you, Brendon. Please just make sure y'all keep tapping in. Brendon's doing great work over here. It's not easy to podcast every day. It is not easy to podcast on this volume at this dead zone of the offseason as well. So, yeah, make sure y'all show him love, and make sure y'all show him love on Twitter as well, because for the attention that people give to things that they don't like to see from people that cover teams, that same attention times 50 times 100, in my great opinion, should be given to things that you do desire to see more of. So let's kind of correct that and make this space of ours a better one by way of that support. Appreciate you, Brendon.
Yeah, appreciate you. All right, that's it. Hit follow, hit subscribe. Back next week. Announcement to come. Enjoy your weekend. Long weekend, hopefully, for most of you. And we'll talk soon.